I posted this on Reddit too, and people were very excited for it. They talk about you all the fucking time, dude.
Oh, that's cool. I guess is it? Hopefully, it's positive.
Oh, it's all positive.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, like, I mean, I'll never. Usually, it's like, and they mention me. Because like I'm a narcissist, so I Google my name on Reddit like every other day.
Naturally, yeah.
Usually, if they mention me, they're going to be mentioning you too, being like, oh my god, like an expert on narcissism who's actually like compassionate towards us, which is crazy. All right. Yeah. Anyways, hello everybody. Mar, how's it going? Also Visceral. Nice to see you guys here. I'm here with Mark Edenson, in case you guys don't know who I'm sure you guys do, and Yeehaw, hello Yeehaw. I'm here with Mark, expert on narcissism, and we're going to have a nice conversation about NPD.
Let's do it. I'm excited to be here. I always enjoy our conversations.
Oh, it's always great. Like I think some of my favorite videos on this channel are the ones that I did with you.
Well, some of my favorite videos on. No, I'm just kidding. I was going to say on your channel.
Fair enough. Yeah. Oh, it's funny. Gray Lizard's here, Judy, Jennifer, Michelle. See, the bigger my channel is, every time I go live, I'm like, oh my god, I should have like a roll call of people I say at the beginning, just so I don't have to keep it up like this.
Well, you know what's really impressive to me, Jacob, is the community you seem to have built.
I'm very happy with it, honestly. Mm-hmm. And part of the saddest part for me about my channel growing is that I'm like, I can't engage with everybody the same way I was able to at one point.
I think I saw a post that you made about that and about kind of taking a step back from comments.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I'm interested to talk about actually today a little bit is just, the whole like YouTube phenomenon and as like your channel gets bigger, more, and full disclosure, Jacob and I were talking about this for the few minutes before we started, but as your channel grows, it nets a wider audience and it brings in just a lot of craziness and negativity and oh my goodness, I've recently had just a tiny little taste of it. The last two videos I posted blew up a little bit, one of them more than the other, and my goodness, it's been a flood of that kind of stuff.
I'm sure you've seen this too on your channel. Like when I first started, when I had like basically up to like 1,000 subscribers, like it was just all positive. Everything was great. Like I knew basically everybody's name who was regular commenters, and I was able to interact with them in a very genuine way. And it was just like the community felt a lot more tight knit at that point. Yeah. And then, but as I've grown, because I'm at like 16,000. It's like there's a lot of people I don't know and a lot of people who are not as privy to my ideas and here for like other reasons, especially since at the beginning it was a lot more cluster Bs compared to like normal people. I never know what to say when I talk about non-cluster Bs. It's a mouthful.
Non-cluster B, I don't know.
Yeah. Like some people are like, use neurotypical. And I'm like, that just sounds even more insulting than normal in quotes.
Yeah. That terminology doesn't I don't use it very much. Neurotypical or whatever in reference to mental illness.
Yeah.
Just because I don't think it's very clear that what part of mental illness is neurologically based and what part isn't. I think there's a feedback loop there for sure. And of course, we know that all psychological phenomena are derived from underlying neurological phenomena, but we don't really understand that relationship, and as far as I can tell, psychology is an emergent phenomenon that it emerges from the underlying neurology. It's not synonymous with neurology,
Yeah, I agree. And like, that's kind of it. And like, because I personally, I'll be like full disclosure. The only reason that I never really used it is because when I thought I was neurotypical in quotes, I hated being called it because it felt demeaning in a certain way. But yeah, it does have some implications about some of it makes, I guess, and this kind of sounds insulting to the field, but using something like neurotypical makes it sound like there's a lot more like hard evidence than there actually is. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that although I would call this a scientific field, it's a very, very new one that we don't know what the hell's going on. We're watching external behaviors and trying to extrapolate categories and how to treat them in ways that aren't always super accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. I just taught a history of psychology course, and it was fascinating to kind of get into the philosophical foundations of the field of psychology. And you know, I mean, it all began with discussion about the soul, right? And sort of ancient Greek, you know, at least in the Western tradition, ancient Greek thought about, you know, what is mind, right? And, you know, like, is it fundamentally immaterial? Does it have some kind of existence above and beyond sort of the material plane? And those sorts of questions that then like developed over the last 2,000 years into, you know, what we have today, which is still, I feel like, pretty rudimentary. Like we're still kind of grappling with this idea of like, what is mind, you know? That is like, it's a fundamental question that just has not been resolved.
It's a very, like, it's impossible to like fully like taxonomize such a complex organ that we don't really know how it interacts with each other exactly. It's very complicated. Also, Christine said, personality ordered is what she prefers.
Personality ordered. I like it. Yeah.
I enjoy it. I enjoy that a lot. I'm trying to see if there's any like actual questions that we can so that I can pay attention to the people that actually want to know things. Yeah, well, but to like, to like wrap up what I was saying earlier, though, yeah, like it has made me kind of sad that like as my channel has grown, I've lost some of that sense of community. I've been able to like maintain it with like, I have a Discord server that like is pretty like tight knit and stuff like that. So I've been able to kind of like still grapple on to the remains of that, but I'm not looking forward to the day that I'm as big as like, I don't know, Dr. Romney. That presumptuous to say everyone get that. I think I will, but
you know, I think the potential is certainly there, and I mean, honestly, if I'm being honest, that's, you know, I've got two main goals, you know, and I think you and I have talked about this before with my channel, and you know, one of them is of course to disseminate this information as widely as possible, and you know, I just see exponential returns, you know, in terms of how many people I can reach, you know, on a platform like this versus like, you know, one-on-one for like an hour at a time, you know what I mean? So that's the main goal, but you know, a second goal is to try to develop you know, a platform, right? I mean, you know, that has its own passive kind of passive income stream, and that brings about other opportunities as well. You know?
It really does. I mean, man, like that's something that like I kind of my like long-term goals in regards to this, because I don't want to be talking about narcissism for the rest of my life. Eventually, I hope that like my job is more or less done. I have a nice library of information that people can go to and like interviews with experts, et cetera, et cetera. But ideally, I would like to be able to like talk about other things I'm passionate about. Like maybe I'd start a travel vlog or something, right? And I mean, how me and Mar, who's in the chat right now, we just started using the audience I already have, start a podcast where we're just trying to talk about cluster B stuff in a much more like lighthearted way that isn't so like serious. It's like, okay, this is a huge issue. It's like, yeah, we're two people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And like, I wouldn't be able to make a podcast like that if it weren't for the fact that I already had this audience built up. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I mean, right? Is you know, because like I want to write a second book, and one of them's green. How does that happen?
Yes, somebody gave a super chat. They said, "Thanks for doing this. I have NPD and was just wondering, without going to therapy, is there any hope? I lost my insurance." Thank you for the $5, first of all. But yeah, I think that's more of a question for you than for me. I have my opinions on it, but.
Well, I think therapy is vital. I really do. I'm sad to say it. I think you can get pretty far, you know, doing your own reading, doing your own self-exploration. I would recommend that you take up a mindfulness meditation practice, and that you do that every day. You know, but really, when it comes to sort of treating the disorders of the self, like such as narcissism, it really takes a relationship to help fill in the gaps. It doesn't have to be a therapy relationship, but a therapy relationship, I think, is fine tailored to that purpose?
I was actually about to ask that if it had to be, because like growing up, I had like, and probably the reason why I can be as self-reflective as I am right now is I've had like a personal confidant my entire life. This person is like very insightful with being able to like read into human behaviors and stuff like that. And I'd go to them and be like, hey, why the fuck did I do that? And like have discussions based around myself and why I behave the way that I do, which I think really helped my self-awareness before I was aware that I probably needed therapy.
Yeah, well, I think having confidants and friends and a supportive partner are all super important and help.
I agree as well. And this is an interesting question. Maggie Pie asks, I've heard the reason why many therapists still don't think that NPD can be treated has to do with that they don't want to treat them as clients. They're apparently mean. Any truth to that?
I have not found in my experience that the patients I work with are mean. I think so. Okay, so part of the reason why NPD was considered untreatable goes back to Freudian psychoanalytic theory and the idea that you can't form an object-related transference with somebody who has pathological narcissism. And at the time, the way that psychotherapy was thought to work was via the transference. The patient transfers feelings they have about some significant person in their past onto the analyst, and that makes that material, that unconscious material, accessible to the analyst, right, and available for interpretation. But with the mid 20th century, there came a number of technical innovations in analytic theory, in particular, that started to recognize other forms of transference that aren't object related. Self-object transferences is the classic narcissistic form of transference, where the person is using the analyst or the therapist as a source of self-esteem and as a sort of a mirror, which is, by the way, when I say that you need to be working in the context of a relationship to heal, that's part of the reason why, is because you need to have certain parts of you that you're not aware of mirrored back to you, and ideally mirrored back in an empathic way that makes those parts of you that have been invisible and have been split off more tolerable, so that you can begin to integrate them into your identity.
Yeah, because I remember reading I forget, I think it was Kohout's book, and like where he notes that like, oh yeah, the narcissistic transference is that there isn't a transference, which I find fucking hilarious, because of how I think the pathological projection that we have and the self-focused nature of the disorder, where we have to basically constantly be thinking about, oh, how am I going to use how am I getting this person to think about me? How are they going to be liking me and stuff like that? Makes a true transference kind of difficult, to say the least.
It's a search for self.
Yeah.
It's looking constantly to the external environment for a positive reflection of self.
Yes.
And
constantly, let me tell you. Very constant. So let's see. Then somebody mentions into the wood 0. Like, because I did hear about this, that MP was considered being removed during the DSM-5 task force. Do you have any like insight into that? Because to my knowledge, it's just that like it was just the structure of it itself was like the diagnostic criteria that we had was like so messed up that like people were like, this isn't even a useful category at this point.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know like all the ins and outs of that. Like why it was retained and specifically why it was considered for removal. My thoughts, I sort of surmise that it is because it's just a poor construct.
Yeah.
It has poor construct validity. It overlaps with the diagnostic criteria of several other personality disorders. It has poor temporal stability, which means that somebody who qualifies for the diagnosis one day may not 2 months later or 3 months later or whatever. And that's because the diagnostic criteria all focus on the grandiose features, which is the defensive presentation of narcissism, right?
Yeah.
So when the defenses collapse, you have a different presentation that no longer qualifies for NPD, even though arguably the person is more symptomatic when they're in a collapse state.
True, very true. Like it's interesting because like it's like how completely lost my train of thought. See, it's getting, as my channel grows, it gets harder and harder to like do live stream just because I'm like, okay, I'm having a conversation, also paying attention to the chat. Oh fuck. I forget what I was going to say.
We need a curator. We need somebody to like pull the comments.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I need an assistant. Mar, get in here. Start doing things. I wanted to talk to you about something because I got a lot of backlash for this, and I'm really curious your opinion of it. So I made a video on Donald Trump and narcissism. You know, the classic, the classic talking point, right? Yeah. And I argued that although he showed a lot of narcissistic features, he wasn't pathologically narcissistic because there wasn't really evidence as personality functioning really impeded his life and made him dysfunctional in any way. And I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of curious of what you would think about that.
Yeah. So I remember there was like a quote from the guy who helped write the original DSM criteria for NPD.
Yeah.
And he said that in his opinion, Trump didn't qualify for the disorder because he wasn't in distress.
Yes.
There was no distress, basically.
Exactly.
For one, the diagnostic criteria for NPD there's not really a place for distress in those criteria.
True, yeah.
You know what I mean? But I remember talking to a colleague about that when that article was published. And my colleague said something like, you know, well, like when he's sitting on like his like toilet at 2 a.m., like furiously tweeting at the world, isn't that itself a form of suffering? You know, like isn't
that's interesting.
Isn't being kind of so obsessive about one's, you know, how one is sort of like one's rightness and perceived strength and whatever else kind of motivates him, being kind of so fused with that, isn't that its own form of suffering? And I was like, well, that's a decent point, you know?
Yeah. I can see that. That's probably honestly, weirdly enough, his tweeting is probably now the most compelling argument I've heard. Before that, it was more of like the only thing that really considered me, why I would consider myself wrong potentially is because I'm like, well, I don't see all of his life. Like, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors and stuff. But that is fucking funny. Oh my God.
Is it Frank Yeomans? I don't want to misquote him, but I thought I think it was him. He did a series of videos where he was talking about his sort of diagnostic impression or whatever, you know, armchair impression of Trump. And by the way, if I'm misidentifying him as the source of this, I apologize. This is just what's in my head. Whoever it was a famous theorist, you know, and clinician with respect to NPD, identified Trump at the psychotic end of the narcissistic sort of continuum. Really? It said that in his opinion, that Trump would distort reality in order to preserve a positive self-image.
Interesting.
Huh. And also, and there being paranoia and other things like that.
Because I remember I heard, I think it was somebody on the Borderliner Notes channel, I think, that was talking about that. I'm not sure if it was Frank Yeomans or not, but yeah, I remember hearing about something like that. Somebody has a positive thing for you, by the way.
Wow. Okay. And that's because he watched some videos on Heal NPD? If so, great. That's awesome.
Do you often get like comments saying that like you help people come to terms with their diagnosis and stuff like that? Because I get that like all the time.
Yeah. That's what makes it meaningful, I think, to me. You know,
it's one of the most like gratifying types of comments that I get because I'm like, I'm like, oh shit, I just felt something. Oh, that was weird. Okay. Every time I get a comment like that.
Well, I mean, I feel like I had mentioned earlier that I'm, one of my motivations is obviously to develop another income stream, right? So, and somebody, I don't remember who it was, like made like a kind of what appeared to be kind of a snide comment, like, oh, that's what it's about. It's like, I mean, come on, like, I got to make a living, right? Like, it takes a considerable amount of time to make.
You can have multiple motivations.
Yeah, and so I hope to be compensated for that. That doesn't mean that that's my sole motivation,
right?
But yeah, I mean, I would say that the main driving force, and I had hoped that my channel would get big enough to even be monetized, but I wasn't confident of that, and so my main motivating factor is to help people,
and people will come at me because like, oh, you're just doing this for attention. I'm like, well, that's part of it. Obviously, I am a narcissist. Like, self-esteem regulation does basically.
you're like, please, observe the channel title.
yeah. Honestly, like, literally, it's like when that one person was like, "You're faking narcissism for attention," and I'm like, just think about that for a second, my dude.
Yeah,
think about that. But like also as I went forward with this, exploring more genuine altruism became like a huge motivating factor too, because usually, I'm not sure if I ever discussed this with you, but like when I try to be altruistic to people, it feels fake. It feels like I'm just doing it for attention, and I can never really like discern if it's real or not. When I'm helping people,
it feels fake to you.
Yeah.
Oh.
And but now that I'm doing it, when I'm doing it on this channel and doing it on accident, like I'm accidentally helping people, there's no room for me to be faking it because I didn't mean to do it. So for me, it's been like one of the only ways I've been able to basically help people and not be afraid that it's for self-sacrificing, self-enhancement.
That's a good use of that term too.
Yeah.
That's a good term.
Well, I didn't know when you like actually, because I learned that term from you, and when you like mentioned it, I was like, oh my God, there's a fucking name for it. I know exactly. I knew it.
There's been a bunch of questions.
There has. I'm getting behind. Visceral Gravitas said, "A more talk about the psychotic end of narcissism," because I'm interested in that too. How would you distinguish psychotic narcissism from neurotic narcissism, or not borderline narcissism?
Yeah, well, so borderline functioning classically sits on the border, right, between neurotic and psychotic functioning. So if you think about it as a developmental continuum, when we're born and for the first couple of years of life, our main goal is to develop enough ego strength to deal with reality, right? The fact that our needs aren't met instantaneously, that pain is a thing, that distress happens, that we're afraid whenever we're separated from caregivers and they don't magically reappear just because we imagine that they ought to.
Yeah.
Right? So developing the ability to just kind of tolerate and deal with the fact that reality does not conform to our wishes is a major developmental milestone, right?
Okay.
At which point we sort of graduate into the next dilemma, which is the fact that we exist as separate individuals from other people, right? That, it's, and that can be really dysphoric and really distressing and terrifying in its own right.
Yeah.
Right. Like I mentioned, there's separation anxiety, right? There's fear of being alone. There's fear of being inadequate. There's fear of not being capable or not being intact bodily, if we get hurt or get an ouchie or whatever. But there's also a way that we need to rely on other people to fill in the gaps in our own capabilities, in our own self-esteem, right? We need to idealize our parents or Superman or Wonder Woman or whoever it is, that is sort of our idealized figure that we use as a self-object, to help kind of construct what feels like a viable, stable, realistic sense of self.
Yeah.
Then we move into the third phase, which would be the neurotic phase. Now that we kind of can deal with reality, and we can deal with the fact that I'm separate from you, right? My thoughts aren't your thoughts aren't my thoughts. And I can't therefore magically reconstitute you if I injure you, right? Which is where gaslighting comes from, right? If I do something wrong and it hurts you, I can't just be like, oh, shut up,
You
it's
can't
fine.
undo it,
right?
yeah.
I can't undo it magically in my head, right? That once you have that, you have what I think is some people call object constancy. Okay, in psychology, it's more properly called whole object relationships. Where you're sort of dealing with the fact that you can wound other people and they can leave you for good. And
I can't deal with that.
Well, I mean, a lot of people can't, you know. And if you wound somebody, that the harm is done and can't be undone. And so that's the birth of guilt. Right?
It's fascinating to me when you mention things like that, because like I've had situations where I have been estranged from people, and I have had a really hard time understanding how somebody can forgive me but still not want me in their life. I just could not appreciate the idea that like somebody could still be hurt and not trust somebody while having simultaneously forgiven them. And when I realized that was a thing, wow, that was fucking mind blowing.
Yeah. Well,
to me, it's like somebody isn't in your life because you hate them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like you've obliterated them, right? You know, the fact that somebody could still hold you as a valuable object,
yes,
you know, but not want to be in a relationship.
Yes.
But so the birth of guilt is the birth of the neurotic range of functioning.
Interesting.
Neuroticism is all about guilt.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so, and all of the defenses that go along with neuroticism are about trying to undo guilt. You know?
Yeah.
More or less. I mean, and preserve the object.
Try and deal with it. Yeah. With like a more constructive way, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, like things like repression and reaction formation and stuff like that are kind of about sort of hiding parts of the self from the rest of the self, right? Hiding the destructive impulses, hiding the angry feelings, whatever it might be, the things that you imagine would make you, what might endanger your relationship to the object. Right?
It sounds like the entire like progression from psychosis to neuroticism, it all sounds like it's just like coming to accept things the way they are.
Well, that's really what psychological health is, right?
Yeah, true. That's true.
You know, flexible responding to reality, a kind of a fluid and flexible self-image, the ability to tolerate that other people are different than you, think different thoughts, have different feelings, don't always do what you want. The ability to hold the bad and the good together at the same time. I mean, these are the hallmarks of psychological health, and things that, you know, like the personality disordered range of functioning is really the range where the defenses and the coping is limited and inflexible. And so the person gets into the same problems over and over and over again without insight.
Represent. Yeah. That's funny. So somebody was just asking, do I experience paranoia? And I wouldn't say that I experience paranoia. I'm curious how common this is. I wouldn't say I experience paranoia of like my physical safety very often. I do a little bit, but like mainly it's around like the loyalty of other people, around like people, like it's like, oh, that person's talking bad about me. Or like recently I have, some people probably know who I'm talking about, but another content creator is upset with me. And I was like convinced that he had spies in my Discord. So I was typing lies in my Discord so he would see it and that it would trick him. Or like stuff along those lines I'm paranoid about. To the point that I did end up, I remember once I was kind of curious. I wrote out all the symptoms of paranoid personality disorder and sent them to my friends. And I was like, do you think this describes me? And basically the universal response was, I'm not gonna make a comment on that. Which I thought was funny. But yeah, I don't really feel like I don't really fear for my physical safety as much, I would say.
Yeah, you know, well, I think it's when I don't know, when I think about personality, I think about personality styles, and there's typically a dominant style.
Yeah.
And then there are less dominant styles that a person can have, you know? I mean, a person can have a combination of different personality styles. And where they are on that range of functioning from psychotic to neurotic kind of dictates, how that style shows up in their life.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Somebody's got the terminology down here. Visceral Gravitas says neurotic depressive functioning is the goal. And that's
visceral, my dude.
Well-versed in the analytic literature.
Somebody sent earlier. And I wanted to talk about this because it's something that I don't really understand when people ask about it. Is people want to I see, and I mainly see this on TikTok, where people are like, "Oh, I see similarities between ADHD and MPD," which I always struggle to really address. One, because I have both, and two, because there is that genetic link between them, and I recognize that. But I just don't really see similarities between them, and I was curious if you do.
I gotta admit, I don't. I mean, I know, I've diagnosed ADHD, in my training and stuff like that, and worked with it a little bit, when I worked, for an HMO in my one of my postdoctoral years of training. But I don't. It's not really a part of my practice so much.
You're not really focused on it just because.
Yeah, I mean, well, I will certainly talk about it with patients if it comes up. I don't. It's my practice is not really a patient comes in and I'm like, you have this, and this. And
right.
You know what I mean?
Here's some pills, leave.
Yeah. Right. I feel like ADHD is one of those issues that really responds well to psychoeducation and to, kind of working with someone to kind of problem solve and troubleshoot, to kind of get construct, adapt your environment, right? So that it facilitates the way that your brain works.
Yeah.
And that's, and I feel like it's an important consideration. I don't know to the extent it might overlap with, a personality issue or a personality style. I think to the extent that somebody has a personality disorder of any kind, it will exacerbate whatever is else. Sure, so everything gets worse.
Everything sucks. This is actually something I want to talk about this because I think this is very interesting, kind of important to talk about, because I remember when I would go into therapy, at first I expected the therapist to kind of be able to call out my lies. I expected them to kind of see through my bullshit, see through the mask and stuff, so to speak. And I didn't really realize that it was kind of up to I was only going to get out of therapy what I put into it in terms of the truth.
Yeah.
And I am curious if there's anything that you guys do have to kind of shift through when a patient may not be completely truthful.
You're asking me to tell you the secret handshake, huh?
I want to use it for myself, actually. I'm going to use as a narcissist, I'm going to use it to manipulate more people.
Right. Yeah. So I get this a lot. We got a Trump supporter telling us that Trump did a good job. I mean, that's fine. I'm not here.
Yeah, I'm not making
have a political conversation.
Let me put it this way. I think I'd make a great president. So Trump having NPD says nothing about what I think his policies are like.
Yeah. About diagnosis. Well, okay. So yes, there are. Oh, and then they go on to say, and Trump was a narcissist. That was his downfall, and it made them sad. Well,
that was a very nuanced view that I wasn't honestly expecting.
I wasn't either. Yeah. I mean, I'm like a
curveball.
Okay.
Yeah. That was fair enough.
Able to hold both of those at the same time.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, so it's not that I'm using narcissist, because I always want to make it clear I'm not using narcissist as a pejorative to describe Trump, and I still don't even really think he has NPD. It's just that I think it's an interesting topic because to analyze personality functioning like that. And I refuse to have any political beliefs nowadays because I used to be a fucking far right extremist.
Well, I think I saw a video that you made addressing that, and I thought it was very powerful.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's part of my life that I I don't know. I have like a lot of feelings on it. I don't like it's. I wish that I wouldn't. Honestly, I kind of wish I wouldn't have brought it up, especially now that I'm getting some backlash from it from some people that I wasn't expecting. But it is what it is.
Well, you know, as somebody who's, you know, kind of public about, like, you know, my emphasis on NPD and pathological narcissism, I do get questions from time to time about Trump. And I feel like I just want to stay out of that conversation. Like, I just, you know what I mean? Like, I'll talk about like the issues, you know, like I did, like, you know, well, this clinician says this, and something like 60,000 different mental health professionals all signed a statement saying they had grave concerns about his mental health.
Yeah, which I'm not gonna lie, I thought that was kind of like, I didn't like that people did that. Felt kind of unprofessional to me, that a lot of people were so confident that Trump had a mental health condition, even though that none of them were, you know, treating him.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is possible for just like, you know, a cardiologist at the airport can look at somebody who has all the signs of having a heart attack and say, I think that person's having a heart attack, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think that a mental health professional can look at a highly, like a public figure with that much exposure, right? A presidential candidate, and say, you know, I think there might be something going on there. I would stop short of declaring, you know, it's this, right? I mean, you know, I don't know how much of his thing is like a studied persona. Yeah. How much of it is, you know, just for the like his handlers are saying like, hey, that really played well. Say more of it. Like, call that person disgraceful again. That really works. You know,
when someone's such a public figure, how do you actually get into the meat of who they are as a person? Yeah, is the big thing, because it's like there's no way to say. But I've got another super chat from Ray. Thank you.
Oh, awesome.
Would going to therapy once a month be worth it? By the way, you need to read my chats. I have questions. I'm special entitled. I'm sorry. Okay, there's a lot of you guys here.
I think going to therapy at even once is worth it. So, you know, going once a month, that's, you know, 12 times more a year than you otherwise would have been going, right? Yeah. So every little bit, whatever you can swing, you know, I think is helpful. As long as feels like a good fit to you and feels like, you know, you're getting something out of it.
Right. I agree. I don't think therapy is ever a waste of time. So, well, unless you're like a really bad therapist.
Right. But real quick though, I want to get back to the previous question about diagnosis and cluster Bs, because there's this idea out there that, you know, like the narcissist, you know, comes in and pulls the wool over the therapist's eyes, right? You know, kind of like gaslights the therapist into believing that, you know, the narcissist is a swell person, and right. And I've dealt with that kind of an accusation a number of times from like loved ones of patients, you know, spouses and stuff like that, right? Who are like, oh, now he's in your corner, or you've fooled another one, right? And it's, first of all, I'm naturally in my patient's corner because they're my patient, and I'm aligned with what I believe to be their best interests, right? It doesn't say, by the way, I'm not saying that I aid and abet abuse or anything like that, right? Yeah, that's not in anybody's best interest. Yes, yes. Like, I want to be clear about that.
Practically speaking, jail time isn't great for the patient, I would imagine.
Right. Or, you know, I mean, and it's just, it's like that way of expressing oneself is not healthy, right? So that's not in a person's best interest. I don't consciously tolerate that or collude with that or whatever. So the way that you sort of diagnose a personality disorder is, over time, you start to notice the inflexibility in the presentation. You start to notice that the person talks on the same themes over and over and over again in a way that is sometimes shallow, in a way that's sometimes rigid, in a way that feels like it is in the service of a psychological agenda, that is often quite like circumscribed. You're like, oh, this person is often speaking in a way that seems designed to preserve their positive self-image, seems designed to sort of pull me into gratifying that and providing sort of a positive, affirming, validating response, right? Colluding with sort of keeping some part of the self that feels bad out of sight, out of mind, externalizing, that sort of thing. So it's sort of like, so all of that you kind of notice over time. And plus there's the countertransference experience of working with somebody who has a significant personality issue, where you feel boxed in as the therapist. Yeah. You feel like there are things I can say and things I can't say, right? You leave session and you feel like you just like, you have like a head full of this person. And that's not the typical experience working with patients. And it's,
what do you mean a head full of this? Like your thoughts are like based around them?
Well, so the person is in crisis, right?
Yeah.
Inside, right. And they're utilizing what are called primitive, yes, walking on eggshells. Exactly. Yeah. They're utilized. And by the way, in the most recent edition of Walking on Eggshells, I am featured.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't really. I like found it, like in like, I like,
You're just reading the book. You're like, wait a second.
Yeah, no, seriously. They had the third edition has a chapter on narcissism. It opens with a quote from my book.
That's
and
hilarious.
then there's another one in the chapter. I was like, oh, anyway. I was like, well, that's cool. It's like just a little minor little.
That's fun. Yeah, I'd be like I remember I was on Reddit recently, and I saw like it was like in quotes. It said, in quotes, it just said, no self-compassion, no self-love, only grandiosity. And I was like, that sounds familiar. Did somebody copy me? And I click on my TikTok. I'm like, oh shit, somebody just posted that. I'm like, oh, okay.
You're famous.
Yeah. It was a very surreal thing to go through.
Right. Yeah. Just to finish that response real quick. A head full of somebody. So the boundary between self and other is permeable in personality disorders, right? And so there's a lot of projecting happening, and a lot of something called projective identification, where the person projects something and treats or regards you in such a way that it pulls you into acting as though the projection were true.
Yes.
Right. So a paranoid patient will project ill intentions onto you as the therapist, and then regard you suspiciously and like always be questioning where your interventions are coming from. Right. And it makes you start to feel like, what's this like? Knock it off, like intolerant to that, so then you start to like behave in the kind of aggressive way that the person projects.
Is expecting you to.
Exactly. Yeah. So then you leave session, you're like, man, what is going on here? Like, why did I say that? Like, what is this person doing to me? Right. So these patients are provocative in their relationships outside of therapy, and they're provocative in their therapy relationships too. So people are like, oh, well, that narcissist is tricking you. And I'm like, no, somebody who really has NPD is not going to be able to, over the long haul, like convincingly act like somebody who is flexible and has healthy self-esteem and can take critical feedback and all of these, like, they're not going to be able to pull that rabbit out of a hat.
Yeah, I agree with that, like, completely. It's like okay, because with narcissism, because fraudulence is one of the core aspects of narcissism, in my opinion. Just the trying to present your way in a way that isn't exactly genuine to yourself. But although people in my life, they never knew that I was a narcissist because they didn't really know, if they even knew what narcissism was at a very surface level and probably inaccurate view of what it was. But I don't think there's a single person in my life that didn't eventually think, this guy has something going on.
Yeah. I mean, and it's hey, Dr. Ruth is here.
Hey, Ruth, what's happening?
Hi. Okay, but there was another question that you had up there. Then I was like, no, let's answer the other question.
Fuck, I forgot. It was just something about like, Jesus, God damn it, this is hard. I wish I had like a I wish I could click through them one at a time. Oh, here. Like basically just asking like if poverty or excessive economy contribute or increase or decrease in dark traits than people.
Yeah, I think there's a societal impact for sure, and a cultural impact on, you know, what, like a culture's or a society's values definitely play a role, right? In terms of like what people consider to constitute the good life. You know, where, like, for instance, you know, the United States, for the most part, is an individualistic, you know, society, right? We emphasize individualism, right? You know, like the American dream, right? You're going to triumph against adversity and build yourself a life, you know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and all of these like ideals, you know, they become pressures inside of people. They become ways that they kind of focus their life and attention. And when they feel like they're failing to measure up to those, then they become sources of distress, right? And that's going to be different in one culture versus a different one, maybe one that's more collectivistic, you know, where there's not as much emphasis on individual, you know, strident, like.
Interestingly enough, I hear that obsessive compulsive personality disorder is the most common personality disorder in the U.S. because of that, you know, the Protestant work ethic, more or less.
Oh, yeah, don't make a mess. Don't be messy, you know.
Yeah. Be polite. Well, okay. Oh, so I was having a conversation with Ruth. This is pretty off topic, but it was reminded me of, like, you know, that stereotypical kind of like narcissistic behavior where it's like the kind of people that will demand the best table at a restaurant and get really mad when they're denied it and stuff like that. Or somebody who will like not wait in a line and stuff like that. Or like be super just domineering and rude to their therapist, very just like putting them down and stuff like that. It's a presentation that I have never related to. And me and Ruth are talking about it, and we think, and I'm curious what your take on this is, that it might be a cultural thing, because since I grew up in the Midwest, a lot of my persona is going to be based around being polite and being gregarious. Because to me, I would see an action like that, I'd be mortified. I would be looking down on somebody who is being so demanding or rude to waiting staff and everything. And I'm curious what your clinical experience with seeing presentations like that and like the cultural contributors are.
So you know, like clinically, you know, you can't work with somebody without there being an alliance, right?
Yes.
And so, like, I made like a short, and somebody commented that, oh, you know, the guy from Succession would eat him alive, right? Like the old man in Succession. I can't. Brian Cox is the actor, and I can't remember his character's name. He's like this sort of strident narcissist, I guess. I've only watched a few episodes or whatever, but and I was like, well, you know, the person has to want treatment, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit in a room with somebody who's like looking down their nose at me and like, you know, like declaring, you know, that they don't need therapy. I mean, okay.
No, it's like, okay, why are you here?
Right?
Like, why are you paying me money?
Yeah. Like, see, okay, well, come back when you do, you know?
Right.
So, you know, I don't see too much of that, like directly, like that personal exceptionalism that you're talking about, that kind of like derisive sort of, you know, I'm better, like holier than thou or better than thou kind of attitude. And I'm careful when I'm working with somebody to not sort of step on toes in a way that would cause a catastrophic rupture in the treatment, where they would then, where that would be their kind of
their reaction would be that aggressive. Yeah.
You know, it's whenever I sense that the heat is up like that, I try to pivot to what's called a process comment, where you're talking about what's happening in the room as opposed to engaging with the actual issue that they're heated about.
Yeah.
It's not to say that I haven't had that experience. I mean, I have. I've had therapies blow up in my face before, you know, because you didn't realize that something was that kind of an issue, and you step on it, and boom, you know, now you're a bad object, and they're never coming back. And
I mean, like, my therapist tells me all the time that she's had clients that are just like blown up or stormed out. And that's something that, like, but I want to touch on a little bit more, because like when we have that conversation around like, oh, the narcissist is manipulating the therapist, and stuff like, because I was just reminded of this again. From a narcissist standpoint, I want people to think when they say stuff like that, why would I go and pay money for somebody to trick them? I can do that to anybody around me. I don't need a therapist for that. Because I would cite my study that's like, 53% remission rate, which I think is, whenever somebody's like, narcissists can't change, I'm like, okay, well, you're wrong. And they're like, oh, well, they're just tricking the therapist. I'm like, right. What? They had an option to be in therapy or to not. It's not like, why would, like, what would be the point?
It's like that. It's like that. I want to put a dog ear or whatever on Visceral Gravitas's comment there, because I think it's important. What did you? Sorry, totally lost my train of thought. You were talking about you could trick anybody.
Yeah.
Why would you pay money?
Yeah, why would I go to therapy just to trick the therapist? What would I be getting out of that from a practical standpoint?
Right. I mean, unless it's some kind of like weird conquest or something.
Yeah, which would I can even trick a therapist. It's like, well, it's not hard.
But it reminds me of like the no true Scotsman fallacy, where it's sort of like it's sort of like, well, if somebody's really a narcissist, then okay, narcissists can't get better. So if somebody's getting better, then they must not really be a narcissist. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or they must be tricking you into thinking that they're getting better when they're really like the premise there is that narcissists can't get better.
Yeah. So, it goes off that assumption, and there's really no, and like they're just rationalizing around that any way that they can. There's really no way to fight like that. Just so certain of an assertion that is just blatantly like I don't get why that is such a common talking point nowadays, that narcissists can't get better. It just sounds, I don't understand it.
These people, everybody, I think part of the problem is there are 1,000 different versions, like images of narcissism floating around out there.
Yeah.
Right. And so people are saying that, well, the narcissists can't get better. They're thinking about a particular, like they have a particular idea of a narcissist in their head. Yes. And they can't imagine that person ever getting better, right? But what they're not realizing is that narcissism is variable in its presentation. And there are many presentations of narcissism, many configurations of pathological narcissism that can get better, right? And it just might not happen to be like their mother-in-law. You know
exactly,
what I mean?
Yes.
Right. And so these people have like one or maybe two like prototypical relationships that they've probably self-identified as being about narcissism based on videos they've seen or books they've read. Yeah. Right. And they're reasoning off of that experience. And they don't realize that the diagnosis is much broader than their stepfather. Right.
No, honestly,
or their ex or whatever.
That is something else, is that people have a very homogenous view of narcissists. All narcissists do this, all narcissists do that. When it's like, I always say there's as many presentations of narcissism as there are narcissists. I mean, like, even because, like, I mean, how me and Tess, me and her will, we have a lot in common and we relate to each other on a lot of things. But like, you watch one of my videos and you watch one of Tess's videos, you're going to have two very different impressions of the type of people that we are. Mm-hmm. Or Cluster B Milkshake, for instance, too, or Early Morning Barking. All very, very different people that if you had this rigid view of narcissism, there's no way you're going to be able to identify all of us.
Yeah. Okay, so Visceral Gravitas says, therapists can't work with blowing up and acting out. I would think that's evidence of getting close to core content. Yes, but you have to be careful how you approach core content. There's a term called going under the defense, where if you try to go too deep, too fast, you'll hit a live wire and it becomes disruptive to the treatment. Now it happens, and you can work with it. But you want to kind of have like an optimal range, right? Where you're kind of getting close, but not too close, so close that it becomes a trauma and it becomes disruptive to the treatment, but close enough that, the person is sort of developing insight and starting to, make their own connections inside of themselves. So that's the dance. That's the art of it. Right? You can't just go in there and be like, like, you're really afraid you're no good, and then like, like the person's like hair's on fire. They're like, I can't can't tolerate it or whatever. That's not, just like you can't teach children that way. You can't treat patients that way. You have to work with where they are.
Yeah.
Meet them where they are. So.
You think you're no good? I would love to see how that kind of therapy session would go. Just being like, oh my, you're afraid of being good enough. Oh, fuck. Okay, so this is funny. This guy, I'm really curious because somebody says how to test if somebody is a narcissist. And obviously there's no silver bullet, obviously, to be like, oh, that person's a narcissist because of this reason. But I want to know if there's anything that ever sticks out to you that like is always like a moment of, oh, I think I know what I'm dealing with now.
Well, I would say that in therapy, it's watching for the development of self-object transference.
Yeah.
That's a key indicator that there's a narcissistic issue.
How do you distinguish a self-object transference from like a more traditional one?
Yeah. So, let me think about that for a second here.
It's okay. I'll look for more questions to answer because we're always so behind.
So like self-object transference is one where you can feel that you're being sort of treated as a satellite or an extension of self in some way.
Yeah.
Whereas, an object-related transference is one where you may feel put in the position of an important figure from the patient's past, or treated as though you were someone else, but not treated as though you're an extension of self.
Gotcha. Okay. So,
and I'm struggling to kind of put it into like more concrete terms.
Is that what people mean when they say that, like they feel like they lost themselves in me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is something to this day, I still don't fucking understand it. I really don't. It's funny because that's something I hear consistently, that people lose themselves in me.
Yeah.
To the point, even I had a best friend at the time who like always, the most that I understood it was when he said that he felt that he was just my sidekick or something like that. And that was where his identity felt like it was based off of, just because of the dynamic of our relationship.
Okay.
But I don't know I still just can't wrap my mind around how feeling like you're like, I don't even know how to put into words. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think it's probably over time, I imagine, like we need to feel that we're being kind of noticed, right, by the person we're in a relationship with, like seen.
Yeah.
And if somebody is preoccupied, by self, issues pertaining to self, then the other person will feel kind of unseen and unrecognized, and like their function is auxiliary to the process of maintaining self, right? And that is what it feels like to be treated as a self-object.
I don't think I'm ever going to be able to relate to that, but I get it conceptually, I think. That's funny. Okay. Somebody asked earlier, and I thought we should touch on, because I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this. They asked if they can develop NPD at the age of 40, which like that was just kind of not much else to say other than that. Even diagnostically, it says that it has to at least early adolescence. That's a question. How early do you think narcissistic traits start to like emerge age-wise?
2 or 3.
Really?
I mean, as the personality starts to come together, yeah.
Okay.
But not that. And by the way, I'm not saying that like 3-year-olds are pathologically narcissistic. Okay, I'm not saying they have NPD.
Yeah.
I'm aware that they, the diagnostic criteria require you be over age 18. Right?
Only for ASPD.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, for NPD, it can technically be a 3-year-old for NPD.
Okay. Well, that's. I mean, you may be technically right there, but I think it's just not done.
Yeah, exactly. It's not common practice.
Yeah. But the defensive adaptations that develop into pathological narcissism, or NPD, are present in very early childhood. Dr. Ruth is right. 2 and 3-year-olds need to be narcissistic, but when that process is subverted, or when those needs aren't met, then a process kicks in where the child has to defend against the fact that those needs aren't being met.
Yeah.
And they have to compensate for what's not being provided by the early care environment. There is, of course, a intersection with temperament, which would be genetic, right?
Yeah.
There might be a predisposition to, kind of have a certain kind of sensitivity or a certain kind of like a difficulty being soothed or whatever. But those wounds, they are typically sustained early, and then peer relationships through adolescence can serve to weaken the grandiose compensatory self and make the person more prone to collapse and presentation.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense to me. Oh gosh, God, I keep losing my spot when it comes to when I'm going through comments and stuff. Let's see. And if you see one that you want to touch on, feel free to point one out.
There are so many great questions here, and I wish I could just, go through every single one.
Like, I'm going to go on my computer now, and I'm just going to stop putting it up on the screen just because it's really hard to do it on my phone. I have like very limited space.
Okay, well, here's one. Crowned Sora. How would you guys explain what an NPD collapse looks like? I have issues understanding what it is. Yeah, do you want to?
I can do my own experience, because I would say when I experienced like a collapsed self state was when I got back from basic training. Because when I left for basic training, I was very, very popular. I had a lot, it was like I was leaving for France when I left. And I had like massive friend groups that were basically all based around, getting my self-esteem needs met. Like, if I'm being like realistic about it, I get back and a lot had changed. Like, a lot of those friend groups didn't really exist anymore without me kind of like managing them. And there was a new a social group that I wasn't included in. And like, that made me kind of panicky. I felt like I wasn't important, stuff like that. And I started getting a little self-destructive. And I started doing some really shitty things in a desperate attempt to keep people around or to get my self-esteem needs met. The more and more, and then it was just like a cycle of like just compounding on itself at that point, which kind of culminated in, and I won't point out, like, to show how central these social groups were to my function at this point. Before I left for basic training, I had not gone a single day for 2 years without like having a social interaction with one of these people. So it was like very central to my functioning. Like, to the point that like I wasn't really interested in relationships that much because it distracted from maintaining these social groups. And so when I lost all of that, it was like, I started getting really, I guess panicky is the right word. I was alone for like a long period of time that I wasn't able to handle. It was like I had to finally kind of look at myself and be like, oh, right, I hate myself. I forgot. Because I wasn't able to like distract myself with getting those needs met. There was a point that I felt like I thought that I forgot how to talk to people. I thought I forgot how to like have a meaningful conversation, how to charm, how to be charismatic. And it did culminate in a like attempt on my own life, because I was filled with like everything that I didn't like about myself. And that was like an extreme case, but I guess you could also say like more minor instances where I'm just kind of like, I just present like a vulnerable narcissist, where I'm a lot more, I haven't seen somebody for a while. I haven't got my self-esteem needs met, or I don't know, my channel's not doing as well as it should be. I'm thinking like, it's like I get very paranoid, not super paranoid, but like paranoid that people like don't like me, that they think I'm worthless. I'm way more ready to react with anger to things. My inner criticism is a lot harsher, like a lot more like self-hate. Stuff like that is generally what I consider to be like collapsed states, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that you kind of hit all the points there, right? That, you know, I mean, think about it like this. I once I think Stephen Mitchell, who's a very talented analyst and writer, describes the suit of armor that somebody with NPD or pathological narcissism wears, right? And at first the armor is to protect from the outside, but eventually the armor becomes necessary to hold the person up.
Yes.
And with the loss of the armor, there's a collapse, because it's like if you relied on a suit of armor to instead of your muscles, you know, right? And then you lose it, and everything is atrophied, and you just kind of fall apart.
Your entire sense of self is based off of that self-esteem regulation that you can get. I remember once, I think a good way to way that we experience this, to say, is once Tess told me, she asked me, do you understand how people can know who they are if somebody isn't telling you? And I was like, fucking yes, somebody put it into words.
Wait, say that one more time. I'm not sure that I got it.
Tess said, do you know how people can know who they are without somebody telling them?
So say more about that. I'm not sure I understand.
Like, if somebody isn't telling me aspects about myself, how do I know it's real?
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, like that's why I'll get really obsessive if somebody will compare me to a movie character or something. I'll spend the next 2 hours researching everything I can about this character,
figuring out, finding yourself in it.
Yeah, exactly. I get obsessive with it and stuff like that. Okay. I consistently ask my friends about qualities about myself to see if do you think I'm like this, or a way I do it, as I'll say a quality about myself that I want to have. I'll pretend to be self-conscious about it and be like, do you think I'm because then if they say that I am, then I know that they're not lying to me, because I'm showing self-consciousness about it, and they wouldn't want to insult me if it wasn't necessary.
Tricksy.
It's the stupid little games that we play to get because we can't, ask for we can't be vulnerable. We can't just ask for reassurance. Oh my God, it's funny.
So somebody says they've got a way to treat NPD, and we've got somebody up here that says, why does it matter so much when anybody thinks about you?
So that's
an easy thing to take for granted, I guess, if you feel like you have enough self-esteem to not care about that.
Yeah,
it's like
you can't like yourself if other people don't like you.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh yeah, actually, I wanted to bring this up because Gravitas brought up a recent video that I had. Why can't I fucking grieve? Because it's so it's something that I've noticed. I have people and things I value. For example, I had a buddy in the army who I was friends with, and he shot himself, and I just couldn't bring myself to feel any grief. Or more recently, this was brought up because my favorite childhood cat that I grew up with just died, and I couldn't feel any grief about it. And I value these people and things. I just don't grieve them, and I don't know why.
I mean, do you have any ideas about it?
I assume it has to do with my narcissism. That's all I could really gather about it. I was wondering if this was something that you saw in with other narcissists and where it came from for them.
Well, I think it's hard to let things in.
So I can't truly value them, more or less.
I'm not sure that it means that you can't value them, but so much as you still.
Sorry, yeah. I literally told my friend I'm going live. I will call you if I can.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a defense against dependency, for one, and with most narcissistic configurations. There's a defense against sort of allowing the self to sort of recognize, how much you needed somebody or depended on somebody or loved somebody.
That makes sense.
because to do that would be to kind of point out a chink in the armor, right? A gap in the protective sort of shell, and a vulnerability that I think is perceived and felt to be a liability.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard to go there. You know, it's
That
hard
makes
to
sense.
go there and feel it. It does not to say that that it's not there, because I think, in my experience, people with narcissistic issues are profoundly dependent on other people. But
don't say that. I hate that. No, you're right.
Sorry to break it to you. No. But there's a profound dependency there on, right? Because without others, then, like you say, you collapse, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's also hard to acknowledge that the depth of that dependency, which is probably why it's hard to grieve.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I would say, like, because acknowledging any dependency feels pathetic in my mind. Like, I can't bring myself. So that makes sense. Is that I'm minimizing the connection and the like actual emotional connectiveness just to protect myself from that realization of, oh shit, I'm not completely independent, which is not tolerable. Oh gosh.
So there's some drama happening, it looks like.
Oh gosh. Mar, where are you? Mar, fix it. What drama?
Just somebody spamming the chat, I guess, or trying to ask a question, but like one line at a time.
Yeah, maybe don't do that.
Yeah, just put the whole thing in a comment, and we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, or at least fit as much as you can into one comment. Is a user.
So Olive Angel 74 says, if a narc, first of all, I'm averse to the term narc. It feels derisive. But anyway, if they don't grieve, when they cry and tell you how you are to blame for their issues because you decide to discard them prematurely, is that fake crying or fake emotions? No, I think it's I don't think it's fake. But I also don't. You gotta remember, when somebody has a personality disorder, they're not integrated, right? There are different parts of them. They exist in pieces. Okay, it's like different rooms in a house. One room is filled with junk. One room is filled with all the valuables. One room is filled with all the anger. Now, I've lost the metaphor here, but right. One room is filled with all the dependency needs and longings, right? And so being in that relationship is like moving between rooms, you know, for the person, for the narcissist, and also for you. And so when you find yourself in the room where all of the grief is held and all the terror and all of the kind of, you know, unintegrated vulnerabilities, then that's what you get.
Yeah.
But the person will quickly, hopefully, reconstitute themselves and re-implement the defensive structure, and then you find yourself in the grandiose room where they don't need you anymore, and they think you're a piece of shit for even, you know,
for how dare you leave me?
Yeah, yeah. And these are. It's not that these are feelings that you or I or anybody don't have. It's just ideally we've integrated them so that they're less extreme.
Yeah.
Right. We all have grandiose strivings. We all have dependency longings. We all have, you know, parts of us that you know hold these different aspects of facets of the human experience. But ideally, our upbringing and our early care environment and our early experiences were facilitative of integrating those, and we didn't feel unconsciously that we had to keep them separate.
And I would say that, like, it's something that people, like, I don't feel like it's appreciated enough that the loss of a person is, like, at least for me, like, being abandoned, quote unquote, is like it's very, very painful. I try to never show that to people But if they did see it, they would see a very broken man in that moment. I can see that those tears being very, very genuine, especially, and it sounds like in that instance, he was trying to like rationalize the pain by blaming you for like what was going on. But yeah, it sucks. It really does.
I think that people with this issue who suffer with this disorder, they get hit by loss all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And it can be years and years and years of loss all of a sudden. You know, that's that kind of live wire, skinless sort of experience that Marsha Linehan describes for BPD. But it can also happen in NPD when a person is in a collapse state.
Yeah. Let's see that. Do you use anger out of fear? So like, in my experience, my alexithymia kind of determines how that goes, because it's like I don't know what I'm feeling half the time, and most of the time that I will react to that with rage, especially if it's like a feeling that I don't like shame. I react to with rage all the time because that was more tolerable than shame and like stuff like that. So I can't think of a specific instance where I would use rage out of fear, but I could definitely see it happening.
Yeah. I mean, you know, anybody ever like seen a cornered dog, you know, or animal? I mean,
yeah.
they're scared, right? But are they necessarily trembling and quaking? Sometimes they're snarling and barking, and they got their hackles raised, right? You know, I mean, fear is valuable, but so is the ability to sort of cover it over with anger.
Mm.
We all do that. Everybody in this chat has done that. I'm sure. I'm 100% sure of it. Right.
Remember, shit, that's something really. I just always think it's funny whenever I talk about my emotions before, like I started like realizing that like, oh shit, I should be feeling emotions differently. I only had 3 emotions. It was good, bad, and angry.
Good, bad, angry. I mean, it's so simple. It's elegant, you know.
I mean, like it's like it would be. I remember. Oh my god! I remember. For so long, I couldn't distinguish. I thought I would feel disgust at. I would hear like something like about like, let's take like, you know, a child being like sexually abused. I would hear that and I'd feel disgust. And I would think that was empathy, which I thought was funny.
Well, you know, I got into this thing. One of my recent videos was about empathy and also about Dr. Ramani, just by like just casually, just like tangentially, right? But it brought a large crowd of angry people. But anyway. A lot of the comments were like trying to really oversimplify empathy. You know, they were like, well, don't you know, narcissists experience cognitive empathy, not affective empathy. And so therefore, and I'm like, well, okay.
I don't think we've even experienced cognitive empathy, honestly.
Really? I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. You know?
I mean, we're projecting all the time. We assume that you're acting for the same reasons that we are. So how can we have like an actual good knowledge of why people are acting the way they are when we think that they're like us when they actually aren't?
See, I think it gets confusing, right? I think like, I mean, I imagine that it's maybe hard to tell, you know, what's projection, what's not sometimes. And the same thing with, you know, empathy. I mean, there's so many different ways that we could sort of qualify empathy. And yeah, there's a cognitive component. Yeah, there's an affective component. But I don't know that that it's really valid to like separate them and say like one consists solely of intellect, the other solely of, you know, like I don't know that that's, you know.
Yeah, that doesn't seem
that simple, right? I mean,
especially since like it's like we don't like there's no like. I'm trying to. It's like what like the ultimate question: what the fuck even is empathy? Like I can appreciate things that people are going through and understand them, but not have any emotional. Like I can appreciate things that, like, for example, my friend, his dad dies. I'm like, oh yeah, that's terrible. That I wish that wouldn't have happened to you. Like whatever. But I'm not having an emotional reaction. I'm still using empathy to be able to appreciate the fact that he is going through something and my actions are reflecting an empathic ability because I'm going to be treating him, you know, nicely, being like, hey, can I do anything for you? Like, do you need to talk about it, et cetera, et cetera. And when people are like, oh, narcissists don't feel empathy, it's like, okay, just because I don't have an emotional reaction, does that mean I'm not experiencing empathy? I feel like I don't know. I feel like that's iffy. I also hate when people say the core of narcissism is a lack of empathy. I want to punch somebody when they say that.
Yeah, it's just not. And you can be, even like in the like flawed DSM model, you can be diagnosed with NPD without demonstrating a lack of empathy.
I read one study that only 44% of narcissists met that symptom criteria.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like when you're focused on one thing, it's hard to see other things.
Yeah.
Focused on your self-experience and the viability of self, right? Then it's hard to focus on other people and what their experience. It's hard to prioritize that.
Yeah.
And so that and then the longer you're in that situation, the more the less able you are to do that, you know, the more in the habit you are of focusing on self. And so I feel like it's
because I mean, generally when I hurt somebody, it's not because, well, I mean, like I've never like gone on my way to hurt somebody for like the pleasure of hurting somebody, because I wouldn't enjoy that. I'd probably feel shame if I did enjoy that. But generally what happens is that people don't even come to mind when I do something that could be hurtful to them. It's like, I didn't even consider it. I had this conversation with my therapist where, because I messed with this one dude because he pissed me off. And like, because like he did something, I'm not going to get into like what exactly happened, but like, I intentionally did something that I knew was going, okay. So he used to date this girl who I'm still friends with and who he knows that I had an intimate relationship with afterwards. And he was not very happy about that. And we were at a table eating breakfast, and I purposely leave my phone. I text that girl and purposely leave my phone up so he'll see the notification and then be like distressed about it, because I was like, well, fuck you, man. Like, you know, I'll fuck with you back. I don't like people talking shit. And so I was talking to my therapist about having done this, and he was distressed by it, and it actually did cause some issues later on. I talked to my therapist about it. I was like, I felt like I was justified. Like, he was, you know, messing with me. I didn't really do anything wrong, yada yada. And she's like, well, okay, maybe you were justified, but like, how do you think that made the other people who were there feel? And I'm like, how the fuck would that affect them? Like, I was like genuinely like baffled by it. It didn't even occur to me. That other people were going to be distressed because I caused some issues for this guy and what he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of perspective, I think, is something that we need to be clued into, so, you know, to have, right? Developmentally.
No, like hands down. And now I try to go out of my way to be like, okay, who will this affect other than just me and this one person? Also, Crown C points out that you don't need empathy to be a good person, which I very much agree. And also, we probably shouldn't be boiling down people into, you know, terms of good and bad anyway. But if there is such a thing as good, or there are other factors that go in, like, you know, compassion, empathy don't have to go hand in hand. Also, hi, Lupus. I didn't see you. Lupus asks, why are people with cluster Bs not automatically categorized as CPTSD?
CPTSD is not. It's a newer.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know it's on the DSM.
Yeah, it's not a diagnosable disorder in the DSM for one, and it's a newer construct. You gotta remember, these are all just constructs, right? These are all like, hey, we noticed this phenomenon. Okay, let's try to like kind of draw some lines around it and figure out what it is or how it works or how to treat it, you know. And nobody's looking at this stuff through a microscope, right? Yeah. They're not diagnosing this stuff using brain scans or whatever. So you know, these diagnoses are decided by committee. I mean, you know, a group of psychiatrists get together once every 1,000 years. You know, I don't know how long. It's like, it seems to be about once every decade or so. They get together and they you know, redraw the lines, right? And that's how it works.
Would you agree that all people with personality disorders probably fit the criteria for PTSD too?
I think that PTSD is operative in the development of personality disorders. I don't know that I would say they all meet the criteria for PTSD. But I do think that chronic trauma, in particular chronic relational trauma, is the main thing that causes personality disorder.
Yeah, hands down. Because I'm diagnosed with because I have 3 diagnoses, which is NPD, PTSD, and ADHD. And like sometimes when I talk about the PTSD, I'm like, it almost feels redundant just based on the trauma aspects of NPD itself. It feels like it kind of could cover all of that.
Well, you know, PTSD is sort of by definition an inability to integrate experience into the larger whole, right? And that is the thing that defines personality disorders, I would say, is difficulty or inability to integrate disparate aspects of experience or identity into the larger whole. So trauma really makes that difficult. Trauma keeps things separate. You know, it keeps things frozen in these. You know, I once heard it compared to like a photo on the mantle. You know, it doesn't change. It's just always that. And when a person is triggered or they're re-experiencing trauma, it's not as if the trauma is happening again. It, in a very real way, it is happening again. And that, I think that accounts for a lot of the seemingly inexplicable extreme reactions that people with personality disorders often have to things. Yeah. They're being triggered. There's trauma that's being re-experienced in the moment. They're not just as sure as that old trope of like the Vietnam vet diving under the coffee table when the helicopter flies over or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, it's like I'm back in Nam. No, in a very real way, neurologically, they are.
Yeah.
There again. It's happening again, right? And I feel like that's what happens to people, with relational trauma too. And it's not as extreme, but collectively, it layers, it builds.
Yeah. Interesting. I agree. Let's see. So, why am my throat? I'm trying to see what.
Dr. Ruth asked something about the development of empathy a while back.
Oh, she said, I'd like to hear Mark's view on how to help people with NPD develop empathy.
How to help them?
Yeah.
I think through modeling.
Yeah.
We can't give what we haven't got, right? So
yeah.
I think that all treatments of pathological narcissism have to go through a phase where the patient is just soaking up the therapist's empathy, just like a child goes through a phase where they're soaking up the parent's empathy.
Yeah.
And it becomes their empathy, becomes their own ability to do that.
And I wanted to point this out too, because I have a video where I talk about things I've seen help me have more constructive relationships with people in my day-to-day life. And I mentioned that strong boundaries is very important. And because I have one buddy who says when they have to bring something up with me, to basically make that boundary and not push it and also not bring it back, just strong, consistent, and stable. And I say that I respect people who can stand up to me. I respect people who can who won't just who I can't just bulldoze over because they feel like my equal then. And somebody pointed out that I was suggesting the opposite of what a lot of therapists recommend of just a bunch of empathy to help heal NPD. And I want to make it clear in this live that I'm not saying I think that there should be a very different relationship between a narcissist and a therapist, and a narcissist and a loved one. It's not anybody's job to be, it's not your job to be that narcissist therapist, because it's that's probably a therapist's job. You're not qualified to do it anyway. And your own happiness should take priority in that instance. kind of off topic. I just remembered that comment and wanted to like clarify that.
The treatment does not consist of any one thing, right?
Yeah.
You're not like just empathizing. You're not just, validating. You're not just interpreting. You're not just it's a conversation, right? It's a conversation that lasts however long it lasts, sometimes years. And the same way that anybody here built a self, through interaction and reflection, right? Certain kind of interaction that facilitates a certain kind of reflection. And that's how you did it. And that's how the therapy works. It's just that's all it is. It's a relationship.
It's down. Serene Songs asked, Dr. Mark, can you see his narcissism while you're interacting with him now? No offense, Matt.
Well, I don't know. I'll be honest. No, not while you and I are just talking here right now.
Makes sense.
I've seen some videos, I think, where you allow yourself to kind of get into your feelings, where I'm like, oh, okay, I can see that,
Yeah.
But just like sitting here, like just kind of talking like that. There's like the affect isn't high. The stakes are low. We're just kind of talking about this abstract thing.
There's no reason for me to be defensive.
Yeah.
It's like, because it is fun. And I think that's, especially in relationships where I do have like a lot of distance, a lot of people aren't going to see my narcissism because I know that I'm narcissistic, and I know people don't like narcissists. So I try not to act narcissistically. And I have known people for years that have never really caught much of my grandiosity, just because like if I only see them like once a month, I can be a lot more careful about my image management with them. Now, if me and you talk like every single day, you'd probably see a lot more of it, as opposed to what I show, like, whenever we do end up being able to talk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's be real, right? I mean, we're all sitting here with some core insecurity, right? Driving our psychology, right? Driving your perceptions, driving your thoughts, your feelings, how you're sort of metabolizing or processing experience, right?
Yeah.
Each and every single one of us has at least one, probably multiple core insecurities. Now, most of us aren't leading with that, right? Whatever mine is, I'm not like here, like just kind of grinding that agenda, right? Reassure me, right? I mean, I'm not, why? Well, because I've developed the ability to negotiate that insecurity of defensive adaptations to kind of, right, like to hide it when it's or turn the volume down on it when it's not appropriate, right? Does that mean I never like stay up at night like worried about the things I'm worried about? No, of course I do, right? Everybody here does. But that's part of what having kind of a flexible, integrated identity means, is that you can do that. And so, especially when the stakes are low, I think most people can kind of let their driving insecurities play second fiddle to whatever the job interview or the dinner with the date or the, whatever it is, right? Or shooting the shit with a friend. Some people can't, right? The less able somebody is to do that, the more severe their personality issue probably is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Makes sense. Let's see. Somebody mentioned prayer in terms of like healing and stuff like that. And I'm not going to talk about that too much, just because I'm not a particularly religious person. But I do always say that like religion I think can be a valid way to help your growth and to aid in it. I don't think it's like the only way. And I think there's a lot of people that won't work for as well.
Well, I made a number of people commented on one of my recent videos that, narcissists are demons and they're Satan incarnate or whatever. They're filled with the devil. And fine. If that's what you believe, that's what I have zero interest in arguing that point with anybody. Right? I don't, but I did kind of make, I guess, sort of a dismissive statement about it in a subsequent video where I was like, I'm not here to talk about ghosts and goblins, and people got like agitated, but they were like, you're making fun of people's religions, and that was not my intention. Right.
How is that saying that a mental illness isn't demons?
Well, that's the thing is, I do discount that idea. I don't subscribe to that idea. Right. So to me, and nor do I somebody could tell me that, you're narcissistic because you're possessed by a demon, or because, you like didn't answer a troll's riddles correctly, or because, right? I mean, and it would all be the same status to me, which is false, So that's where that came from. But I don't subscribe to a spiritual or a metaphysical or a supernatural explanation for psychological phenomena. Other people do, and that's great. That's fine if it works for them. I just don't want them showing up on my channel, like saying that people are demons, because that's not helpful, in my opinion, to say that.
I also want to point out, Mark says it's okay that some people believe that. I don't think it's okay. You have to believe what I believe.
Okay, well, different strokes, right? I mean,
It's funny. I have PD questions. Long-term viewer of mine. I do think the space be integrated does require calming or lessening of our activated state. I think MBDs seem to be very activated. It cuts our space out of object constancy. I'm not sure what you mean by activated.
I do think the space to me does require calming. Yeah. Yeah. So, I see object constancy, and it's like there's a part of me that like gets really pedantic, because object constancy is sort of technically about like young children, the ability to recognize that when you put an object, right, like behind something, that it's still there, but I think what people are using it to describe here is whole object relationships. And that's just some, like, I can't, like, my brain has to point that out. So I apologize if that feels pedantic. It's just I can't.
Well, wait, isn't there like, isn't there like object constancy and then object permanence? Aren't those two different things?
Oh, object permanence. Maybe.
Because I thought object permanence was like I'm not entirely sure, and I trust your judgment more than mine. But
tell me that I'm wrong. I need it. No, maybe that could be, and in which case I'm just kind of being a prick then, and I'm wrong on top of it. No, but
the website here says object constancy is the ability to retain a bond with another person. Even if you find yourself, object constancy is the ability to retain a bond with another person, even if you find yourself upset, angry, or disappointed by their actions. This particular cognitive skill develops around 2 to 3 years of age.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm not trying to be a dick either.
Where's the citation? Sure. Show me the journal. No, maybe. In which case, I just made a whole thing out of nothing. Okay, but yeah, the idea that somebody has to be. Yeah. Okay. All right. Crown Sora jumped in too about it. But the question about activation, right? Yes, it is difficult to learn or to make connections that are productive, right? Yeah. Psychological connection, emotional connections that are productive and not trauma based when affect is high.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why and mentalization based therapy has a thing about this as well, right? To sort of recognize when the affect level is too high and then go the opposite direction. Yeah. You want to keep things in that optimal range where the person can be making productive connections.
Oh man, we'll probably also wrap it up here soon because we'll take like a few more questions because it has been. I didn't realize it's like been an hour and 40 minutes.
Oh yeah,
I need to take my meds. Oh gosh, this is fun though. I love doing this. I have a Mark, I got a question. Do you like ever get sick about talking about narcissism?
Oh well, first of all, whoever got that thing about object constancy got it off Psych Central. I'm gonna look this up. Because I want to know for sure, because I'm telling you, it would relieve me of a nit that I like keep feeling like I have to pick. So for me, for my own like mental health and well-being, I'm going to look it up later.
Okay, the American Psychological Association has a definition on it. The ability for an infant to maintain an attachment that is relatively independent of gratification or frustration based on cognitive capacity to conceive of a mother who exists when she is out of sight and has positive attributes when she is unsatisfying. Thus, an infant becomes attached to the mother herself rather than her attention-reducing menstruations. Then she comes to exist continuously for the infant, not only during instances of need satisfaction. This investment by an infant in a specific libidinal object indicates that he or she no longer finds people to be interchangeable.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm not sure what that really means.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyways, do you ever get sick?
It has attributes of both object and whole
like.
object, and yes. Okay.
Yeah.
People aren't interchangeable anymore. Okay. Got it.
Everyone's interchangeable. So I don't have object constancy. Everyone's interchangeable. But yeah, do you ever get sick of talking? Because like I've just found myself getting kind of burnt out about it lately.
Oh really?
Like
you post a video every day, right?
I used to. Not as much anymore. Because I like conversations like this because it's like new information that I'm like, okay, like this is actually giving me new stuff to work with. But since my videos are so often just like based around constant self-reflection, and I feel like I'm not like learning much new about myself anymore, just based off of self-reflection. And so I'm like, God, I don't like. I need to find some other ways to engage with this.
Well, I think just in general, well, first of all, to answer your question, I go through phases, where, but I guess phases of like libidinal investment in different aspects of this, right? Different aspects of my practice, like sometimes I feel more invested in the clinical work. Sometimes I feel more invested in making videos. Sometimes, like I'll be like, damn, I got to write another book. I got to do it, and I'll like get into that.
Please do. You have to.
I want to, but it's hard to find the time and the focus, but it's definitely like on my priorities list.
If you do at some point, you should, it would be amazing if you could make a self-help book like for narcissists. Yeah. Because there's like no resource, like it's in our communities, it's a constant thing talked about. We got DBT workbooks, and that's basically all we got. We got nothing specific for NPD.
I know it. Yeah. I agree.
It's like it sucks. You would think there'd be more of an investment in helping narcissists get better if there is this epidemic of narcissistic abuse and stuff like that, because it seems like that'd be a good solution right there.
I found myself looking up the information about moral panics the other day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just with this, I think that there is a facet to all of this kind of craziness about narcissism that fits the description of a moral panic. Yeah. Where it's sort of like they're among us, you gotta watch out. You gotta learn the signs, right?
Like the fucking daywalkers out there.
Yeah. Or communists or whatever.
Yeah.
Like there's this group of people who are subversive in some way or, dangerous in some way. And we need to be on guard against them. and the societal piece, where like experts start to show up that reinforce the moral panic, moral authorities, right? Some of these personalities out there who are, making a living off of kind of stoking the flames of that fire. And by the way, that's not to say that that there isn't a valid piece to this, because I think there always is a valid piece to it.
It wouldn't be like there wouldn't be a panic about it if there wasn't something real.
Something, yeah, satanic panic. I remember that too, Ruth. Yeah, people thought that all of these like lazy suburbs were harboring like satanic cults that were like sacrificing children and stuff. And I mean, we were taking this shit serious on the news, like, so I don't know. I just try to stress, like, look, this is a mental illness. It is. Yes. And it's one that can be quite like provocative interpersonally, that there can be abusive behavior. Yeah. I don't think it's defined by abusive behavior. I don't think it's synonymous with abusive behavior.
I mean, everyone hurts people, and so to some degrees. It's a very human thing to do, and I take full. And obviously, narcissists probably have more. They have more turbulent interpersonal relationships. I can contest to that. I have had a lot of turbulent relationships, and I've hurt a lot of people. But the tying this morality to it, that narcissists are evil, and even when I look up, even articles that like acknowledge that this is like from trauma and stuff like that. Somehow they are like, the verbiage is so strange because it's able to twist even the fact that it's from trauma and we're cut off from certain emotions because of that into like this evil light, which is really bizarre. Like if there's an article that's like, oh, narcissists are incapable of loving, I hear that and I think, like, that's fucking sad. That is a miserable existence to have if this is something that's true, which, it is. A narcissist with enough work can, love, obviously. But they paint it as if this is a reason that we are evil, as opposed to a reason that we are suffering.
Yes. So Uncle Tom asked me the classic question here. Have I ever been in a personal relationship with a narcissistic person? And I guess my response is,
I'm curious.
Have you? I mean,
oh, damn.
Right? I mean, how do you know? Okay.
True. Yeah.
I think I would say that 95% of the people who ask me this question and who believe that they are in a relationship or have been in a relationship with somebody who has NPD, that person is not diagnosed. They've diagnosed them themselves. And maybe you're right and maybe you're not. Maybe that person has narcissistic traits, but maybe they're also a psychopath.
Sure.
Right? I mean, maybe there are psychotic aspects to their, their functioning, and you're not, you don't know what you don't know, right? Yeah. Which is why it takes a certain amount of training to diagnose people.
Yeah.
And so, I hear these horror stories, like, well, this person, like, actually, like literal horror stories.
Yeah, no.
And then they're like, how can you defend that?
Yeah,
and I'm like, I'm not. I don't know who this person is. I don't know if they're narcissistic. I'm not defending that.
I'll get like questions. It's like, why is the narcissist stalking me, and why did he kill my dog? And I'm like, I don't know. Why would anybody do that? Yeah. It's like, and I do, and like a super common thing that I see is that since we do view abuse through this lens of narcissism at this point in time, I see people describing like very typical like paranoid personality disorder behaviors or obsessive compulsive personality disorder behaviors, and assuming that's narcissism because it's like, oh, well, they're abusive, they must be a narcissist. And I'm like,
exactly. Yes. Where the umbrella of abuse, right?
Yes.
Is sort of like, that narcissism is abuse, and that's the mentality. And so if I felt abused, therefore it must have been a narcissist who did it.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole identity that can be built about that. Now, look, I didn't mean to be dismissive of that comment, but I meant to emphasize the point that that lay persons are not qualified to diagnose mental illness. And that's a fact. There should be nothing controversial about that. That's a fact.
Yeah.
So if you are diagnosing people in your life as having a mental illness, and you are not credentialed to do so, then it's a fair bet you're incorrect.
And I do think there's
I don't diagnose plumbing problems in my house. I have a plumber come and do that. Why?
Yeah.
Because I'm not a plumber and I don't know what I don't know. Right.
And it's like a lot of times, how helpful is it to be viewing these problems through the lens of narcissism? Like for example, like something I see all the time is like, oh, I think my boyfriend's a narcissist. Should I leave him? And that's like all the information I get. And it's like, right. Why is that the thing that you're focusing on? There's so many other factors that go into this. Like, how is your guys' relationship? Is he treating you well? Is like, I think like I can sympathize with people who want to understand something they experience better and going through the lens of pathology for that. But I don't feel like that should be like one of the last things that occurs, in my opinion, for when going through like healing and stuff like that. Like, and not to say that people like let's say Dr. Romney is all about, it's like, leave your narcissist, stuff like that. I'm not saying there's not value in that, because there is a place for that. And there are people that benefit from Dr. Romney a lot. And that's why I won't attack her. But I also think it's valid for me to also say I do find her work stigmatizing. And I find it not constructive to understanding narcissism at like a true level. But I can still see value in that work, despite it not, in my opinion, not being a good resource on narcissism. And I completely fucking lost. I just went off there. I don't know what the hell I was even talking about.
No, I mean, it's just there's feelings run high, Yeah. And just to kind of take a step back real quick about, have I ever been in a personal relationship? That's a boundary that I've set on my channel. I don't answer that question. It's not your business, I'm not you, but not the guy who asked, or the person who asked, Uncle Tom, who asked the question, or anybody else. That's a part of my life I'm not interested in sharing. I'm not interested in. Let's say that my mother was a narcissist. Well, I'm not interested in calling her out publicly about that, right? Let's say that an ex-fiance was. Well, I'm not interested in talking about that publicly, right? What I have to offer is a certain amount of clinical expertise that should not. Honestly, it's to the extent that it's derived from my personal life. Well, you better hope that I process that in my own therapy, right? I mean, I don't. What I have to offer is not just unfiltered like trauma. I mean, that's not. That's not what I'm not interested in discussing my childhood outside of a few little glimpses to illustrate a point, maybe. So,
which I think is a fair boundary to draw in how you want to relate to, your content and stuff.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't say that to like invalidate people who do draw on their personal experience, because that's its own thing and it's a valuable contribution. But I don't, that's not a choice that I've made,
Yeah.
I say this, that I have significant experience with severe personality disorders. Some of that is personal, some of that is clinical. And so it's not like I have this naive idea, like this Pollyanna-ish idea about what narcissism is. I mean, I've seen all the different facets of it. And I think it's inconceivable to some folks that I could still have like a compassionate perspective or an objective perspective, right? But I the way I consider it, the more you know about something, the more compassionate you tend to be.
Yeah, the more you understand. I mean, I see it all the time in my. I see it all the time in my comments and stuff. Is that like people do become, by watching me, like a real person, talk about these struggles, they do understand. They know what narcissism is now, and they're like, oh, they aren't monsters and stuff like that. I think it's natural. Like, and I doubt you, and honestly, I doubt you would be as focused on narcissism as you are, like in form of research, if you didn't have some sort of compassion, like even off the bat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the other times we talked, I sort of told the story about how I got into it in the first place. But you know, I find it fascinating, and also here's something I want to say. People think about narcissism as like this discrete personality disorder, right?
Yeah.
And they have a type in mind when they think about it, you know, whatever it is. But when I talk about it, I'm talking. The reason I'm very careful to say pathological narcissism and NPD,
yes,
is because they're not the same thing. And you know, generally in personality, there's sort of two poles, right? There's the relationship with yourself, and we call that narcissism. The relationship with other people. Okay, those are the two pieces of personality, really. And when something goes wrong with the relationship with the self, well, that's pathological narcissism. And so it can show up in a myriad of disorders, right? Depression, it can show up in generalized anxiety disorder. It can show up in a number of different personality disorders. Pathological narcissism can show up in any disorder where there's some disruption or distortion in the perception of self. Well, that is by definition pathological narcissism, you know? So I'm not just talking about like people with NPD.
I agree. It makes sense. I think Crown brings up a good point. Do you think we should come up with a new name for narcissism so it's not as stigmatized based off the name alone? Because I have an opinion that I think there's going to be a limited amount of destigmatization that can happen without changing the name, honestly.
I think you're probably right. There's a lot of baggage there. I mean, there's a ton of baggage. Like self-esteem dysregulation disorder or something like that, you know, would be, I don't even think that's my term. I think I came up with something different, and then somebody suggested that in a comment on a video. But whoever that was, you know, credit where credit's due.
Wait, sorry, I spaced there for a second. What was the term that you said?
Self-esteem dysregulation disorder.
Oh wait, that was fucking me. I came up with that.
Okay. Well, there you go.
I was like, did I hear that right?
A shout out to this guy. I can't remember who it was.
That's so funny.
That's you.
Okay. Yeah, or if it was, I guess it could have been somebody that heard, because I came up with that like a while ago because I was inspired from like
good name.
Emotionally unstable disorder for BPD that they're trying to change it to or whatever. It's fucking funny. But because that's like, see, but I'm torn on it because on one hand, narcissist sounds really cool, and I kind of want to keep that label a little bit. But yeah, like, but for practical purposes, I think that, and like honestly, like even nowadays, like if somebody, because obviously like people are like, oh, what do you do? It's like, okay, well, I'm a mental health advocate because I have like a certain pathology. And when they ask, I say that I just have like a disorder that affects my self-esteem, just because I don't want to have to deal with it's so much easier to educate people about narcissism when you don't call it narcissism.
I think so. And I think a diagnostic label that really put the focus where it should be, which is not grandiosity, it's the underlying dysfunction, right? It's the underlying deficit that necessitates grandiosity. That's the real issue, right?
Yeah. Hands down.
And I just want to clarify real quick. Nobody commented on this, but just for posterity, when I said like a distorted relationship with self is by definition pathological narcissism, I think I just kind of want to catch that a little bit, that it depends on who you're talking to, how they would define it. Yeah. That's sort of there's a little bit more of me than the literature in that.
I mean, nobody can fucking agree on what narcissism is.
Oh no, nobody can. So I kind of consider it a bit of a free for all. But
at this point, I'm just going to. I'm as much of an expert as anybody else, so I'm just going by my own definitions. But
you really ought to. I think you're developing a pretty big platform. So. Yeah.
I actually, I did a little joke last night where I added the American Psychiatry Association, asked them to put me on the DSM-6 task force for personality disorders. And I tagged like the president and then I just kept tagging random people. I tagged like the Pope at one point. Somebody's going to see it. Somebody's going to make this happen.
Shameless, but I love it.
Oh, it's so fucking funny. I was tempted to tag you and Ruth, and I was like, I don't want to bring down their reputation by me doing a bit like this. Oh.
Well, I think we maybe just a couple of minutes here. We should probably wrap it up.
Let's answer like 2 more questions or so. And Dr. Ruth said, "You're more of an expert than many who think they are." I mean, I've been invited to speak at universities. I have, and I've spoken at a conference and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm like.
Well, you're talking about how you want to make a transition, right? So, so it's not just kind of like you self-reflecting on your channel.
Yeah.
When you spoke at that conference, I was like, like that's like props, that's I think that would be valuable for professionals in the field to hear someone speak from lived experience of having this disorder. But who's also, done a fair amount of reading and a fair amount of self-reflecting and can provide a first-person perspective that's not so fused with the pathology, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It can offer like such more of a full picture of what somebody like me actually is, because I'm like a real fucking person, not like a hypothetical construct.
Well, there was a book that I read one time it was a first-person narrative of a psychotic break. And so the person had this break, and then they'd gone through a bunch of therapy, and they collaborated with their therapist to write this book. Yeah. And it was so valuable because they described the way that like faces started to lose cohesion. Like when you look at a face, you see like a single thing, right?
Yeah.
But they saw like an eye and like a nose and like a mouth, and they were like not working together. It was like they were separate entities.
Okay, yeah.
Like really kind of like disorienting, kind of psychotic stuff like that they were able to kind of describe. And I was like, okay, so that must be what it's like to like really lose touch with reality.
That's fascinating.
I
mean, I had a girlfriend who she was schizophrenic, and like I remember spending like an entire day where like I would ask her to describe her hallucinations, and I would try to interact with them and like do little experiments and stuff. And it was one of the most fascinating things I've ever done in my life. She has she drew
experiments.
Yeah, like like one of them, she had this one hallucination that there was a man in the window, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go over and try to touch him and see what happens. But to take her off guard, I went the opposite direction of of like around the house than she would have expected me to. Like I went like the longer way, and it was eerie because I was behind where the hallucination would have been, and I tried to wave to her, and she's just staring just blankly straight at me. And I was like, does she not see me? I walked forward a little bit, and like her face like lights up, and she's like, oh, hi. It was eerie because apparently I just phased through the fucking hallucination in this instance, and it was really interesting.
That is interesting. Somebody says they feel the issue is pride more than shame, but the pride is based on shame. The pride is shame. That's why it's so inflexible or exaggerated. That's why it's so problematic. So what happens when the pride falls apart?
Yeah, I would say that like interpersonally, pride can create a lot of issues that can be very instrumental in like the subjective suffering that I experience, but it still just does come from shame. So it's hard to say that a symptom of the shame is more of an issue than the shame itself. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would consider pride then to be a pathological expression of shame.
Yeah. Alistair says I'm a mixed trait psychopath last week. We actually had a Factor 1 psychopath in this chat earlier. I forgot to say hi to him. I did an interview with him. He's really interesting. They're still talking about potential names for MPD. Status Status fantasy regulation.
Status fantasy regulation. Well, that's interesting.
All right, let's do. All right, we'll do like one more fucking actual question. Yeah.
Last one.
Make it good. Some people are more amygdala reactive, like spring. Spring loaded is a good way to describe the reactivity of cluster B people.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple types of hot dogs?
There was a place where I went to grad school. There was like a hot dog stand that was really good. They had all kinds of different hot dogs, like different kind of like they had veggie hot dogs and stuff. It was good.
I want like an ostrich hot dog. Let's see how that tastes.
Exotic meats.
Yeah. I've always had a fascination with eating exotic meats. I just want to like experience every type of meat that there is. I tried crocodile once. Not very good.
Just really embrace your status as top of the food chain, huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Roxanne Yang says, do you guys have any advice on how to avoid inflicting shame on a narcissistic person? And I want to kind of expand on that. Well, make it a little more specific. Like, let's say that you have an issue with how do you point out something that a narcissist did wrong without inflicting shame? I would love to hear your take on that, because I still struggle finding a good answer for it.
Something they did wrong. Well, I think, look, I think that the old compliment sandwich is a tried and true technique. You know what I mean?
Fair, yeah.
But I guess, in the context of therapy, I would be focused less on what was done and more on the motivation.
Sure.
Just try to ground what was done in the whatever the kind of human, the humanity of it,
Yeah.
Right.
In interpersonal relationships, what I notice, how I would go about it in interpersonal relationships, at least, would be like kind of like actually like asking about them. Well, and it depends. Like if you're trying to communicate your own hurt or hurt that was caused to somebody else. I always kind of say like make it more about your reaction be more make it seem like your reaction to whatever was done more your fault than their fault. Does that make sense? Where it's like, I'm having this reaction to you and that's on me, but that's how it affected me, instead of saying you did this thing that made me feel like this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because like it always feels so, whenever somebody is like, oh, what you did hurt me, it feels so accusatory.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's the only way that I can really think of, kind of get around it.
No, I can hear that. I mean, you're managing reactivity and defensiveness, right?
Yeah.
If you want your feedback to be heard, then, I mean, you may not, like ideally the person wouldn't be defensive and reactive to critical feedback, but
sure,
but they are, right? So if you want to be heard, then you have to kind of work with that.
Yeah.
Right? It's just to be clear, if that's like, what am I trying to say here? I guess I'm trying to say I'm a little fatigued. It's been a long conversation, but I guess I'm trying to say, don't stay in an abusive relationship. Don't, if your needs aren't getting met, if you're not being heard, if you're not being seen, or if you don't feel cared about or loved, don't stay in that relationship, you know? But sometimes, we need to give somebody feedback, or we want to have feedback, we want to be able to give somebody feedback, right?
Yeah.
And if you're running into a lot of narcissistic defense around that or reactivity, then there are ways you can couch that so that it's more likely to be received, right? And I think what you say, Jacob, is a good strategy. It's
like,
right.
I'm not swearing by that just because I barely know how to handle myself, but it's the best thing I could think of.
Yeah. So somebody said that I have striated muscle tension.
Wait, what?
Oh, striated muscle anxiety because visceral gravitas. He's reading my body language. I'm I'm more transparent than I thought.
All right. I don't. That's fucking funny. All right. Well, let's end it here. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by. I have had a good time as well. Hopefully, you'll be on again soon. But yeah, I hope everybody has a good day, and take your fucking meds, please.
Right. And... Okay. Yeah. Have a good one. Thanks, Jacob. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thanks for the questions, everybody. Take care.